church, hope you guys are doing well. My name is Jordan, I'm the youth pastor here at FGA Melbourne, and today I'll be running the third session on knowing your audience, particularly when it comes to evangelism. Now I know for a lot of us evangelism is quite daunting and it's quite scary, and I actually wanted to encourage some people here tuning in that hey, it's actually not by your power and by your knowledge and your ability, but really it's the power of the Holy Spirit that really empowers us and mobilizes us to reach people. As you can see, where I'm sitting right now, this is actually my garage, and this is my makeshift barber setup. Recently I've been getting into barbering and cutting hair and giving people fades, and I've been really enjoying it. But why I actually wanted to give this, use this setup as a example, really because, you know, this seat that I'm sitting on right now, a lot of stories have been exchanged, a lot of conversations have been exchanged in this seat alone. And why it's really cool is because over time, you actually get an understanding of the individual. You really get a good idea of who this person is and their actual context of what makes them who they are. So with all this in mind, for me, someone who's a Christian, would it be okay for me to, just give them the gospel whenever I wanted to? What we don't realize is that culture can actually be a huge obstacle in reaching people. And I want to actually talk about this notion of enculturation. And what this means is things like our upbringing, our heritage, all of these things affect who we are as a person. And these things can actually influence our methods in the way that we attempt to reach people, in our ways to evangelize towards people. And we need to be careful that we aren't actually giving people our own culture and our own way instead of giving people the truth that is actually found in the biblical gospel. Sam Chan actually brings up this point in his book, Evangelism in a Skeptical World. And this is actually this simple but yet powerful thing that we can remember, and it's really just this notion of being sensitive. We need to be sensitive. And if I could put it another way, just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean it makes sense to someone else. Because of this, we first and foremost, we need to be aware of ourselves, be aware of our own cultural concerns. Because in actual fact, we ourselves are subject to this enculturation that we're talking about. Why is the gospel relevant to you? You tuning in, why is it relevant to you? Why do you even seek God? What motivates you to do that? And some of you may read His Word or may seek after Him in prayer for comfort. I don't know, who are you? Like, what are you inclined to do? Are you a thinker maybe? Are you a feeler? All of these things will influence you and I guess your cultural context. The truth is, every single one of us is searching for God. But how we're searching for God is going to differ from person to person. Meaning that our understanding of the gospel would not necessarily resonate the same way as it does to others. And when we use this as a lens, we should notice that, hey, it would actually influence a couple of things. Some things like our method of evangelism. How are you going to reach other people? Is it through, an online platform? Is it through phone calls? Is it through being in person, where you can actually go for a coffee with someone, maybe inviting them over for a dinner? Is that the best method for that person? Some of the other things we need to take into account is how we present ourselves. You can share the gospel, you can preach on John 3:16, but if you're doing that as you're walking into an Asian household with your shoes on, you've pretty much missed the boat. You're going to get kicked out of that house. It's not going to go down well with that family. The language you use. Now this is important because yes, we can speak English to people, but while we're talking, we often will use our own metaphors and our own illustrations that might mean something completely different to other people. Now, for instance, I used to live in Sydney, And footy in Sydney refers to rugby league. And here in Melbourne, footy is AFL, Australian Rules Football. And I was so disappointed when I realized that the people at school were referring to a different Bulldogs team to the Canterbury Bulldogs that I loved and that I supported back in Sydney. It means completely two different things, and actually, as a result, we need to be conscious about what we're saying so that we can actually get the gospel across effectively. So, how do we connect the gospel with a culture? Now, Sam Chan brings up these notes, and I want you guys to take note of these. The first thing he highlights is find the existential cry. And really, it's identify the void that is evident in that person's life. Second thing you want to identify is find a redemptive analogy. And what this actually does, it creates a contact point between the gospel and culture. And analogies are great, but what's important is that we don't actually rely on analogies alone to I guess, get the gospel across to someone as the only means of salvation. And what actually happens if we only rely on analogies is that the Bible becomes devalued in a sense and is only valued for the part where the salvation aspect is highlighted. And I think it's so clear that even Jesus himself does that, by preaching in parables, by referring to yeast and shepherd and mustard seeds and so forth. And upon understanding the context of others, learn how you can actually frame the gospel in a way that helps them understand it, okay? And the third thing I wanted to point out is find the storyline and give the gospel as a happy ending. Now, by understanding the journey a person has been on, by empathizing with them, understanding the obstacles that they've gone through, all these things that they face, that actually gives us an opportunity to enter into their storyline and to, I guess, challenge their storyline as well and bring the hope of Jesus as the happy ending and the only solution that they are actually looking for. And as I get to the end of this session, I want to end with this story. This is actually a true story, and as I mentioned, I have a few barber friends actually, a lot who are Christians and even some that aren't, and one particularly comes to mind. Now I wanted to highlight, remember the first thing that Sam Chan brought up was identify the existential cry. And over the times where I caught up with him and he would just give me a haircut, what I got to understand from him was that he was searching for something. Now, if we go to the second point, the redemptive analogy, I related to how his desire to serve people was actually a reflection of how Jesus actually came to serve us. And ultimately, to serve is the heart of Christ. He didn't come down on this earth to be served, but to serve. And I remember, was it at that moment where I felt him just collapse on my shoulder and he just started to weep and bawl his eyes out. At that moment, I encouraged him and I gave him that happy ending that he was looking for. And I encouraged him that Christ loved him and that he was actually not done working in his life. And that by living in him, he would actually find for fulfillment and purpose, all of that stuff that he was looking for, in his career. After that, I ended by praying for him. He was still crying on my shoulder. I still hadn't had my haircut finished, but I prayed for him. And it's actually in those moments where the Holy Spirit actually does his work. I want to encourage someone because, hey, we're not always going to get it right. There are going to be times where maybe we aren't too sensitive, and maybe there's going to be times where we say the wrong thing. But I think we need to trust that God is still going to be able to turn those moments to good. Awesome. Well, hope you guys were blessed by this session. And may God continue to bless you guys. And I'm believing for great things to happen after this. Have a good one, guys. See ya.